Hello everyone, my name is Greg. I am one half of development duo Hut, and I'm here today to tell you a little bit about our upcoming plugin release for Unity called the Context Dialog System, version 090. And I'm going to, in this video, go through all the components that come with the dialog system and explain what they are and why they're useful. The first small blurb about the actual plugin itself. The Context Dialog System is our response to the typical approach doing tree-based dialogue in a game. In the projects we are currently working on, we found that the management aspect of managing dialogue trees was very cumbersome, especially as the games get larger and larger. So we have opted to build a system that is based on a flat database where each line of dialogue contains context of when it is supposed to be said. Our Unity plugin will actually constantly be querying this database and will display the dialogue that is most relevant given your current game state. So when you bring in the CDS plugin, you will see that it comes with a couple DLL files as well as a resource folder with some default canvases and resources that you can use to kind of jumpstart your dialogue. So bring those in. There we go. You'll see that there are several classes within each of these files, including a whole bunch that are meant to basically extend the Unity, give us some more power as we system. These components can be found in the component menu of Unity under Dialog, as well as when you are looking at any game object, you will see them as well also in the dialog here. Anytime you look at any one of these components, I'm going to start with our main one, which is the manager. It's important to know before anything else that we are trying our best to maintain active help documentation on our website. Click on typical question mark button. You'll see that it actually brings you to our wiki and gives you kind of a big text blurb rundown of what all these components do. I'm just going to give you a quick video tour of those right now. So the most important component of this entire system is our dialog manager. That is a Unity component that is constantly keeping track of game states, running the actual queries against your dialog database, managing resources, and instancing those into your game or your nonlinear interface to the dialogues. Most of the options on here are fairly self-explanatory. We have like debug, where it is basically just printing out a text version of what's going on. A list of dialog resources, where any kind of art assets you want your game to be displaying, whether they're character portraits or audio files that connect with dialogues or the actual source files themselves. Those you will all be plugging in here. And a couple of checkboxes that also allow this component to read resources from elsewhere. The way this plugin has been written can allow for modding or extension of dialogue by having people store things in a particular folder in the actual game executable. You can also have it load from Unity kind of platform independent persistent folder that you're aware of. So have it load straight from the project itself when you're deving your game. Rules item here is a list of all of the current rules that the dialog manager knows about. Rules is a term that we purloined from several GDC talks about this kind of a dialogue system, and it basically refers to a line of dialogue and all of the bits of information that are related to it. So aside from the actual lines that are being said, we have information such as the person that is saying it, what facial expression or art asset is being displayed while this line is being said, keep track of the conditions that that line is actually said with. Actually are always scoring these rules based on their relevant current game state. That score is also preserved, as well as the objects, the canvases that it's being displayed on, and the audio files played with it. All that information is stored in the rules and it can be expected here at any time. Something also to note is that along with the custom inspectors that we have for this plugin, we've also added a custom editor in the window menu of Unity, and this will give you a GUI to explore the dialog system bird's eye view. And you can see all the dialog packs that have been loaded in this particular project that just come in by default. See the game state as it currently pertains to the project. Even manually run queries if you want to test out different parts of your dialogue system. And you can also see extended information about the most recent line of dialogue, the most recent rule that has been queried. If you decide to have multiple dialogue systems running in your project at any given time, the plugin supports that. As an example, you could have one dialogue manager specifically for battle text and dialogue manager specifically game events or cinematics or stories. It's up to you, however you wish to work. We're trying to support as many different as possible. So, most important part of the dialogue manager, aside from the resources themselves, is the list of tracked objects. One of the reasons that this system is so powerful is that dialogue is related to the game's context. You can have a different line of dialogue said for when a character is healthy or sick or in the presence of other characters. And for that, you need to have the system tracking the state of all these different characters and objects and scenes. Anything you want the dialogue system to be tracking, you would simply just add it to a list of tracked objects, and all of the state data from that is inspectable will be added to the dialogue system, and your lines of dialogue can query that as your game progresses. When you bring in a dialogue manager, it also comes up with two built-in components here: dialogue emitter, dialogue memory. Memory is what the dialogue system uses to record what has been said, which is good for history and keeping conversations running. And the emitter is just where the audio comes from, the dialogue is played. There is no physical object in 3D space that's talking. The dialogue emitter will just be the dialogue manager itself, and it'll be playing it as kind of a universal sound. The system also supports world space bubbles, so aside from having JRPG style text bubble, you can also have word bubbles appear over a character's head, and that would be something where you'd want the emitter to be a particular character. Other components that come with the system. We have Dialogue File Handler, which is an extension for this dialogue manager and will let you add additional component files. Make your game more complex. This can be useful for localizing your game, doing different languages, or adding on different story packs. And we have Dialogue Timer. If you wish to have lines of dialogue said every now and then, sort of like a character bark, would have a component like this timer run, where you would set time interval. In this component is currently 2 seconds, and it would basically just query the game state every X number of seconds and decide what is most appropriate for a character to talk when they feel like talking after the time interval is up. Run a query and display dialogue on your screen. On top of that, there's a couple other dialogue components that will be attached to the players and objects in your game. Anytime a character talks or speaks, they will automatically get a couple components instantly to them. One is a dialogue audio, if there's an audio related to the line of dialogue that's being called. This is just basically where the sound will come from. One is a dialogue constraint. If you to have a world space text bubble appear in your character, this is something that will keep the text bubble towards the camera at all times, which is very helpful. Cover them here. Constraint. And the emitter would, as your character speaks, the emitter instance on top of that character at the root level. That would be where the dialogue comes from. The emitter itself also displays the rule information. It's the same display that we saw on the dialogue manager itself. Anytime a rule is speaking, just pause the game and inspect all the information that's related to that rule. And I believe covers most of the components that come with the dialogue system. As mentioned before, the wiki is updated regularly, and as we add new features, we will be adding in documentation to cover those, updating these videos as well. There's one more thing I really forgot to add, is that we are also extending the built-in UI system. As an example, so if I look at the canvases, this plugin comes with a couple default canvases to display your dialogue. One is kind of a JRPG style text box that takes up the lower third of your screen, and it has a space for text. And if I just type a bunch of text, alt to white, and we have a button here. Once the character sees a line of dialogue, as they're given options from your system, get multiple buttons that you can pick from, and you'll notice on these canvases we're using our versions of Unity's built-in Unity GUI objects. One is the CDS text here, which is the same thing as a Unity text. One is the CDS button, which is the same thing as a Unity button, with a couple slight additions to show some of the dialogues. And there are a couple others that aren't on the choices option, which are CDS image, right here. With the GUI menu, you'll see those up at top. CDS image, this is a subclass of the Unity image component, and this is meant for character portraits and the like. Last but not least is the CDS label, which is the same exact thing as text component. The only difference between CDS text and CDS label is that label is meant to serve as the character name dialogue. So if your character has a descriptor that's part of the dialogue's information, that would be displayed there. The reason we use these custom components instead of using just a regular tagging it, for example, is for performance reasons. As your project gets larger and larger, if we rely on tags, it becomes very expensive to try to find the objects that we want to display our dialogue on. So by subclassing these components and using them for very specific purposes, basically get more bang for a buck performance-wise. Okay, those are all the components that we have in the current version of the CDS plugin. If there's any questions, please feel free to chime in on the comments below, and happy dialoguing. Thank you guys.